Hi there, beautiful souls. I'd like to talk about my first year of chronic fatigue syndrome and how I think that I did actually everything wrong. Although, of course, there is no such thing as wrong or right. There is a thing as helpful or not helpful if you would like something to change or not. And what I did in the first year made everything much worse. So basically, I just woke up one day, I felt terrible, and I knew something was wrong. It was my rhythm and coping mechanism probably to do extreme sports. So I tried to do that anyway. I was never really ill in life, so I didn't really know how to behave myself during an illness. I went to work, but at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on my first day, I couldn't, and I had to go home and I had to rest. So I was basically then deciding to cut my social life down completely and only focus on work, for my income and my house and everything to go on, everything that I built up in my life, which was at that moment very important to me. And, basically my life was just working or laying in bed. And I spent a lot of time in that bed being on devices, on screens, like my mobile phone or my laptop, either working or just mindlessly scrolling or even gaming. And all these stuff were pretty stressful. The games were pretty stressful. And I had the feeling, because I didn't have any control anymore in my external world, that, pushing buttons and then let something happen was sort of a way to get some control back. But what I didn't realize is that it was really perpetuating the stress response if you do it from such an exhausted place. And about my social life, I think it is always good to remain socially active. Although at that moment in my life, I wasn't really able to connect with anybody, basically because I wasn't able to connect with myself. And that was something that sort of gradually evolved itself from childhood on. And now after chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm able to connect with myself, and my connection with others are much better. But if I advise people in coachings, then, social life and connection with others is very important. Yet I cut it out completely. But I also didn't really understand when the illness would be over. I was always expecting for miraculous changes from one day to the next, which never came. So I think sacrificing my social life wasn't really that conscious. I just thought I'll do it again when I'm able to do it. Then I went to a neuropath or something like it, and she measured in my body whether I had food shortages or mineral shortages or a lack of substances in my body or not. And she found a lot, and she prescribed me lots of supplements. So I think in those early months of chronic fatigue syndrome, I spent almost €1,000 on supplements, which is not helpful at all. And, the problem was not the lack of substances. The problem was a lack of absorption for me. I had leaky gut at that moment. My stool was like almost diarrhea for a few years already. Irritable bowel syndromes. And I thought at that moment that those were conditions that just happened to me. Like every condition in life is just something that makes me a victim or something. But what I learned after that is that all these conditions and to do with the digestion is due to excessive stress. But at that moment, I couldn't really see stress because stress was my normal, and I did not know what relaxation was. So I spent a lot of my money on these supplements. And as well, something else that is easily changeable was diet. So I had a really rigid diet, cutting out all carbohydrates and stuff. But I think that if I'm honest to myself, my diet was already very rigid in the years before, because I wasn't choosing my diet from feeling, but from thinking. I wasn't really in touch with my body at all. I could not really enjoy food. But of course, if you would have said that to me, then I probably would have seen it as an insult. And I see it a lot in the community that people are in the beginning of chronic fatigue syndrome only focusing on simple things like supplements and diets. And of course, it might seem obvious when your body cannot really absorb food or when you have leaky gut, but I don't think that is the way yet. I found out that I was doing much better eating no gluten, no alcohol, no caffeine, and I stick with that for the entirety of my life till now. I don't eat those kind of stuff. And that was really helpful, but also very stressful in the beginning. And I went on holidays because I noticed already that when I went on holidays, like for example, I had a week in Greece sailing on a ship and I was almost feeling no symptoms in that week. So that was weird, right? And then I came home and I slowly developed everything again. It was very stressful to find no gluten food on a holiday, especially in countries like Turkey and Greece where I went. And then the times where I did actually accidentally eat gluten, the effects of it were extreme, like extreme nightmares and like fatigue and waking up every few minutes, and it was just very, very extreme. And that first it happened in, like, I ate something in the evening, and then at the night it got really bad, and then in the morning it was still very bad, and then in the beginning of the afternoon it sort of fainted to my old level. I'm not really sure if this is the way, no gluten or yes gluten, but I think I made it too stressful, and I'm not really sure why my body reacted that way, because it didn't react that way anymore a few years later. But of course it can as well be the result of healing my gut. Then I also found this YouTube channel and this emotional healing methods. There was someone who did sort of a Reiki thing with me, which made me feel better. And in order to keep functioning, I went to visit her twice a week. So I spent, I think it was like 80 euros, 160 euros per week doing that. And that made me be able to continue my life. And there was a lot of emotional healing as well coming out of that period. And I dived into emotional healing like a crazy lunatic, which was so overwhelming to my body because I did not have a clue how to do it. And I still advise emotional healing because it's a big unconscious reason behind our stressful addictions. But I would take it much slower and lighter. At that time, I had the thought that I could heal my emotional body within a few weeks. Now I know that I'm still having emotional stuff to do at times. Because I did not have a social life at that moment and did not have really the energy to do all my previous activities that I knew that gave me joy, for example, like skiing, I did not have joy at all at the time. And it took me like 2 more years to find out what joy really was and how I could have it back in my life and why it is very important to have joy. And the days that I felt a little bit better, I always expected that a miracle had happened, but it didn't. And then I went to do I tried to do those crazy things. And I also realized in those days that everything that I thought that would bring me joy actually didn't. So it took 2 more years of no joy to realize how simple joy actually was and why I needed to integrate it in my life. I also developed the push and crash cycle because I did not really know how to behave in my new limits. So I crashed a lot and then had a few good days, and then maybe a few days later I did not have symptoms for a day, and then I did too much because I wanted to do all the things that I didn't do in those days before, and then I crashed again. And every crash that I had, I felt worse after that, and it sort of had a 2-week rhythm at the end. 1 week a crash, 1 week building up, and then the final day I thought I'm healthy, but I was not. On those days I also tried exercising because I was sort of addicted to bodybuilding and extreme sports, but I always found out after a few minutes that I could not do those things anymore. The funny thing is that in my life after chronic fatigue syndrome, I don't exercise at all. I don't even like it anymore. That's something as well. Like, in this the first 2 years of chronic fatigue syndrome, all I wanted to do is to go back to my old life. And it took me then a while to see maybe partially going back to my old life. And then at a certain point, I realized there's no going back at all. There's only going forward. And my new life had to look completely different than my old life. I also developed a very disturbed rhythm. When I could not wake up in the morning, I went to lay in bed and probably woke up at 11 or 12. And then the next day I had to work maybe, and then wake up at 6 again. And when I stopped working after a year, because I just could not do it anymore, every few months I had to cut a few hours. And then after a year I decided, this is not going to work. My rhythm was so disturbed that within a few months I would sleep during the day and wake up at night. And, this is really not helpful for the adrenals. It's always good to remain sort of a rhythm. And if you cannot wake up, then it means that you did too much, or you were too stressed, and that you could pace yourself better into it and go to bed with some energy. But previously in my life, I always went to bed when I was completely exhausted. And I always pushed myself as well. I remember once I thought in the beginning of chronic fatigue syndrome, or no, just before that I do not have to be tired, because I could always push myself a little bit further. But that is something that I had to completely eradicate in my life. At a certain moment, my whole life was based around recovery. I was trying to solve the problem, trying to solve the puzzle. And what I've learned now is that being in that energy is not helpful. We need to break out of the problem to expand our perspective and consciousness and act from a totally different place, a place from abundance instead of a place of lack. And that took me a few more years to realize. And then I remember I went on YouTube Googling how bad ME/CFS can get. And I found out that there was this man, and he could not see the light anymore. He had always something to cover his ears and his eyes. And I knew that I was going to be like that. And it happened to me for a short time. And I think I should have never done that, because ME/CFS can be very mild as well. It's not really a condition. I mean, I don't really look at illnesses and diseases the same way, like it's something fixed. I see it as a symptom of our lives. So I thought at that moment I had a serious condition, which it also is, but from a new perspective, it's just feedback. And I was expecting myself to get as worse as that man on the video who was bedbound, who had bed sores. Luckily I never got these sores, but it's not helpful to look up these painful images. And I also developed a victim mentality. I was a victim of life, and if I would look back on that old Daniel, I would have never subscribed to my own YouTube channel right now. Instead, I would probably have gotten very angry at me, or angry at my future self, or angry at anyone who's saying something like this. I remember this guy, I don't even know his name, but he had a YouTube channel called Health Recovery, and he was saying lots of psychological stuff. And it took me maybe 1.5 years to finally be open for his advice. And therefore, I ask for everyone who is checking out my channel and website to have an open mind, because a lot of things are probably different than what we expect, how we expected it to be, and our egoic self is so proud of everything that we accomplished, or that we are dragging our body along with, things that are on a to-do list. And all these things that are on here was sort of a to-do list thinking as well. And my egoic self was very proud of this. I actually thought that although I was getting worse and worse and worse and worse, that this was the way to go. And well, it wasn't. So I have an open mind for the things that I'm saying. And, I do not really in my advice talk a lot about basic things, how to deal with fatigue, because you can find these things in my recovery program. So therefore, I like to use this YouTube channel for things to outside of the comfort zone of what we think chronic fatigue syndrome is, and to raise our perspective and consciousness about what we're dealing with, talking about things that nobody wants to talk about. Sometimes I'm losing a lot of followers when I upload a video because they think this is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about simple things like diets and everything. Whereas I know that is not really the way. It can help, of course, but it has its place. But don't expect miracles. Oh, maybe you can. Well, anyway. Very long video. My first year of chronic fatigue syndrome. It wasn't even my worst year in life. My second year was that. Yet I think a lot of things that happened in the second year was a result from this first year, where I probably did everything wrong in the perspective of Daniel. Have a beautiful day. Bye.